The soul must emerge from the ego.
Pro.
Do you serve your ego, or do you serve your soul? The ego must emerge from itself, self-bondage, its self-limitation, its illusion. And when the ego is freed from the three sublimation channels, as Kierkegaard used these terms, ascetical, ethical, and religious sublimation channels, that even though the ego is transcended, there is yet another level, the superego, that still operates from an ego perspective, that is not fully transcended into soul consciousness. Religion is dead. Nobody can be truly religious anymore. However, we can all agree that we can be spiritual, right? So we'll use that spiritual designation, designator. That's the only sublimation channel that's not dead, not a dead end. Spiritual, the spiritual, which stems from religious. Because if you're ethical, you're still a person. You can be a good person. You can drink your Folgers coffee, instant and adequately heated. You can become more civilized, a good person. And your ego can be right about this. But through that rightness of the ego, you still have a belief that you get it, your ego and the rules it has observed and imposed upon itself, and thus informs you how you should act, and then in turn how everyone should act. And these are the rules of the Dharma. And you violated, you just become somebody that nobody wants to be around because you're full of rules. Your ego has been sublimated into the ethical. So everything is viewed in dualistic, right and wrong. But you become sort of an unpleasant person because you're viewed as sitting on a mountaintop with your long flowing robes and your white beard and your admonishments, your rules. However, real ethics can't be rule-based because the ego can't get away from rules. Everything's viewed from that perspective, but rules are made to be broken, and ethics is not a valid frame of reference. So it won't get you beyond the ego. The aesthetic, the artful, can also produce something, a beautiful object, but it doesn't allow you to understand or know what beauty itself is, because even your sense of what is beautiful was determined by the culture that you are acculturated within, and all of that, and the criteria, what is good art, good music, what is beauty? It's all relevant. And all of this has already been contaminated by the movement of culture. Artists come along and claim certain ideas of beauty or forms are obsolete. One couldn't produce an architect these days to go and produce a Gothic cathedral, Gothic temple anymore. Nobody would hire you to do that if that was your idea of beauty, because culture shifts. If you produce a beautiful painting, a work of art in the style of Monet, nobody would buy it because those ideas of beauty have shifted with culture. and the relativity of the ego as it pertains and operates from within its particular acculturation status. There's no more beauty as it was once understood. Even artists don't like the word beauty anymore. It's these days forbidden word. You have to do something that's raw and vulgar, similar to Duchamp and putting a urinal in a museum of art and claim that that's art. You know, that the idea of beauty in one epoch, one age is over. And so the aesthetic and its archetypical beauties and ideas of beauties are trapped within the ego. So that's not a valid form of sublimation. Aesthetic and the ethical are both very limited sublimation channels. And only one will get you to where you're going to the upper death drive, which is the spiritual one, in which the ego has to be completely eliminated. So you don't sublimate, your energies will be gone, and the energy of consciousness will be sublimated into the higher levels. But it's like a caterpillar will never become a butterfly. It has to become a protoplasmic goo that dissolves, and the protoplasm itself turns itself into a butterfly. But the caterpillar doesn't do it in the same way your ego can't turn itself into a soul. It just has to be gone. Your ego has to be dissolved in something. And then the soul emerges from a new perspective, beyond duality. It has to happen through what Santana, the great Carlos Santana, referred to as like a self-sacrifice, but a self-sacrifice that's a soul sacrifice. Sacrifice of the self to your soul. The ego sacrifice to the soul that transcends this duality. Whatever you consider the higher self, most people can't sacrifice to their idea of God because they don't really have faith that there is actually a God anymore. People want to try to believe it, and then they'll say, okay, yeah, maybe, you know, they can try to hold on to an idea of God, but really, truthfully, from their heart to a sense of connection to a real God isn't possible when it's a projection of your own ego. Your belief system or something that is sublimated and really is just the higher ego, what we call the superego. So you don't have to recognize this level of consciousness of your own self that you have not yet reached, that is not another's creation, but there's a potentiality for a consciousness that is more intelligent than the level you're at currently through your ego. You have to sacrifice the level you're at to get to the higher level. And you can't go back to a culture of the values where you started with where you really are. And if you're an atheist, you can't just pretend to be a theist, you know, and the love of God isn't going to just suddenly develop within an ego that doesn't have that love. It's just not going to happen. So if you have a postmodern ego, you're only going to be able to get there through literally developing the capacity to think. Gnosis, a divine thinking. That's the only thing that you actually believe in, that you can think. We all can think, even though you can't believe, but you can, and therefore you can develop that capacity of letting go of the premise of your thinking, the axioms, the initial conditions in which thought develops, and allow a new mode of thinking to emerge without the limitations of those primary assumptions about reality. That's really, when we talk about ego death, that's all we mean. We're letting go of the primary assumptions that we take for granted, that are part of a reality fashioned by the ego. We allow ourselves to question all of that, and that's when new paradigms can emerge. Allow a new paradigm to emerge. Allow the celestial intelligencers of the Gnosis Zone gimmick to fall by the wayside and realize that it was nothing but a manifestation of the superego and not Om Banda.
A major, B flat, B major, C major.
Om Banda. Om, the sound of all creation, bond, that which unites all of creation through the divine frequency. And Amen, the divine word that seals the affirmation in syncretic light formulas of inner gnosis and divine awareness. The soul must emerge from the ego. My fellow travelers, namaste, namaskaram. Hit that subscribe button now.